The morning of December 18, 1944, near the Belgian village of Krinkelt, a German tank commander in a Panzer Kampfwagen VI Tiger, I traversed his turret slowly across the frozen landscape, scanning for American positions through the crystalline winter air. His Tiger, weighing 56 tons and armed with the formidable 88mm KOK 36 litres, 56 gun, represented what German doctrine considered an almost invulnerable instrument of armoured warfare. The frontal armour measured 100mm thick, sloped at 9 degrees. American tanks, he had been assured repeatedly through intelligence briefings and tactical instruction, could not penetrate this protection at ranges exceeding 500 yards. The Sherman tanks that dominated American armoured units mounted 75mm guns, whose armour-piercing rounds would, according to German technical evaluations, bounce harmlessly off Tiger armour at any tactically relevant distance. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. What this commander did not know, could not have anticipated based on his training and the intelligence assessments provided by his superiors, was that approximately 2,000 yards distant, an American tank destroyer crew had already acquired his vehicle in their sights. The weapon trained on his Tiger was not the expected 75mm Sherman gun, it was a 90mm anti-aircraft gun, originally designed to knock aircraft from the sky at high altitude, now mounted on a tracked chassis and loaded with armour-piercing ammunition specifically engineered to defeat heavy armour at extraordinary ranges. Within moments, this Tiger commander would experience firsthand the catastrophic failure of German assumptions about American armoured doctrine, industrial capability, and tactical adaptation. The shell that would soon penetrate, his Tiger's frontal armour represented not merely a technological achievement, but a fundamental miscalculation by German intelligence about what Americans were willing and able to do when confronted with superior enemy armour. The question that this engagement would force German tank crews and tactical planners to confront was unsettling in its implications. How had the Americans, whose armoured forces the Germans had consistently dismissed as technically inferior and doctrinally unsophisticated, managed to field weapons capable of destroying Germany's heaviest tanks at ranges where German crews believed themselves effectively invulnerable? The answer lay not in some sudden technological breakthrough or captured German secrets, but in a distinctly American approach to weapons development that German planners had fundamentally misunderstood. The United States had taken an anti-aircraft gun, recognized its potential for an entirely different role, and systematically engineered a fighting vehicle around it that could engage German heavy armour on terms that negated the protection those massive tanks were designed to provide. This adaptation represented a pragmatic, almost ruthless willingness to repurpose existing weapons systems for unforeseen applications, prioritizing combat effectiveness over doctrinal purity or traditional categorization of weapon types. By December of 1944, German armoured doctrine had evolved through 5 years of mechanized warfare across multiple theatres, developing sophisticated tactical principles based on extensive combat experience against Soviet, British, and American forces. The fundamental philosophy underlying German tank design and employment emphasized qualitative superiority over quantitative production, engineering excellence over manufacturing simplicity, and the decisive impact of individual superior weapons systems properly employed by skilled crews. This doctrine had produced remarkable armoured fighting vehicles, including the Panther, the Tiger I, and the even more formidable Tiger II, each representing substantial investments in complex engineering, expensive materials, and precision manufacturing that consumed resources far beyond what comparable Allied tanks required. The Tiger I, which entered combat in late 1942 on the Eastern Front, epitomized this design philosophy. Weighing 56 tons in combat configuration, the Tiger mounted the legendary 88mm Cage K-36 gun, derived from the equally famous Flak 1836-37 anti-aircraft weapon. This gun could penetrate 100mm of armour plate at 1,000 yards, using standard armour-piercing ammunition, giving Tiger crews the ability to engage and destroy most Allied tanks at ranges where return fire proved ineffective or impossible. The Tiger's frontal armour, 100 mm thick on the hull front and 120 mm on the turret front, provided protection that German testing and combat experience suggested was effectively immune to the 75 mm guns that armed the vast majority of American Sherman tanks and British Cromwell and Churchill variants. German tank crews operating Tigers understood their vehicles, represented decisive tactical advantages when properly employed, capable of dominating engagement areas and destroying multiple enemy tanks while remaining effectively invulnerable to return fire. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. This confidence in armor protection was not mere propaganda or wishful thinking. It was based on systematic technical evaluation, combat reports from multiple fronts, and mathematical calculations of armor penetration at various ranges using known Allied ammunition types. German ordnance testing facilities had acquired American 75 mm ammunition through various means, including recovery from battlefields and examination of captured Sherman tanks. Testing demonstrated conclusively that standard American M72 armor-piercing shot fired from the 75 mm M3 gun, mounted in most Sherman variants, could not reliably penetrate 100 mm face-hardened armor at ranges exceeding 500 yards under optimal conditions. At ranges beyond 800 yards, penetration became virtually impossible regardless of impact angle. These were not theoretical calculations but empirical results from controlled testing that informed tactical doctrine and crew training throughout the Panzerwaffe. German intelligence assessments of American armored capabilities reinforced this technical confidence with strategic analysis that fundamentally underestimated American willingness to adapt and innovate under combat pressure. German evaluators recognized that the United States possessed extraordinary industrial capacity, producing Sherman tanks in numbers that German factories could never match given resource constraints and Allied strategic bombing. However, German analysis consistently characterized American armor design as emphasizing mass production and mechanical reliability over combat effectiveness, accepting technical mediocrity in exchange for overwhelming numerical superiority. This assessment was not entirely inaccurate regarding the Sherman's original design parameters, but it catastrophically failed to anticipate how American forces would respond when confronted with German heavy armor that their standard weapons could not effectively engage. The United States Army entered World War II with armored doctrines substantially different from German approaches, reflecting different strategic assumptions, industrial capabilities, and tactical philosophies developed during the interwar period, when resources for military development remained severely constrained. American doctrine separated tanks and tank destroyers into distinct categories with fundamentally different missions, equipment, and tactical employment principles. This doctrinal separation, which seemed logical and efficient to American planners, would prove both controversial and adaptable under the pressures of actual combat against increasingly formidable German armor. American tank doctrine emphasized mobility, mechanical reliability, and infantry support over direct tank versus tank combat. Sherman tanks were designed primarily to exploit breakthroughs created by infantry and artillery, to provide mobile firepower supporting infantry operations, and to engage targets of opportunity, including enemy infantry, fortified positions, and lighter enemy armored vehicles. The 75 mm M3 gun, mounted in most Sherman variants, fired an excellent high-explosive shell, effective against infantry, unarmored vehicles, and field fortifications. The gun proved adequate for engaging German Mark III and Mark IV medium tanks that constituted the majority of German armor throughout most of the war. However, the 75 mm gun was never intended to serve as the primary American weapon for defeating heavy enemy armor in dedicated anti-tank combat. That mission belonged to the Tank Destroyer Force, a separate branch created specifically to counter enemy armored formations through specialized vehicles, distinct tactical doctrine, and dedicated training, emphasizing aggressive offensive action. Tank Destroyer doctrine, formalized in 1942 and refined through 1943 as American forces gained combat experience in North Africa and Italy, envisioned highly mobile, powerfully armed vehicles operating semi-independently to locate, engage, and destroy enemy armor concentrations. Tank destroyers were supposed to be faster and more maneuverable than tanks, mounting powerful guns capable of defeating enemy armor at long range, but accepting lighter armor protection to achieve superior mobility and lower production costs. The operational concept called for tank destroyer battalions to deploy rapidly to threatened sectors, establish defensive positions or conduct aggressive pursuit, and engage enemy armor from advantageous positions, using superior firepower and tactical flexibility. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Early American tank destroyers, including the M10 and M18, reflected this doctrinal emphasis on mobility and firepower over protection. The M10, which entered service in 1943, mounted a 3-inch gun in an open-topped turret on a modified Sherman chassis. The vehicle provided adequate firepower against most German armor encountered in North Africa and Italy, while the open turret reduced weight and simplified production. The M18 Hellcat, designed for maximum mobility, achieved road speeds exceeding 50 miles per hour, making it the fastest tracked armored vehicle of the war. However, both vehicles mounted guns that proved increasingly inadequate, as German armor evolved toward heavier, more powerfully protected designs like the Panzer and Tiger. The 3-inch gun mounted in the M10, while superior to the Sherman's 75mm weapon, could not reliably penetrate Tiger frontal armor at tactically relevant ranges. Combat reports from Italy during 1944 documented instances where M10 crews engaged Tigers at ranges under 1,000 yards without achieving penetration, forcing American tank destroyer crews to maneuver for flank shots or withdraw from engagement entirely. These tactical limitations contradicted the aggressive offensive employment doctrine that tank destroyer training emphasized, creating dangerous situations where American crews confronted German heavy armor with inadequate weapons for frontal engagement. The solution would require not doctrinal refinement or tactical innovation, but a fundamentally more powerful weapon system capable of defeating German heavy armor at ranges that negated the Tiger's protective advantages. The weapon that would fundamentally alter American capabilities against German heavy armor emerged not from some revolutionary new design concept, but from the pragmatic recognition that an existing anti-aircraft gun possessed precisely the characteristics needed to defeat thick armor at long range. The 90mm anti-aircraft gun M1, adopted by the United States Army in 1940, represented a significant advancement in American air defense capability, designed to engage high-altitude bombers with devastating effect. The gun fired a 90mm projectile, weighing approximately 24 pounds at muzzle velocities, approaching 2,700 feet per second, delivering kinetic energy far exceeding anything available from existing American tank or tank destroyer weapons. Ordnance engineers examining requirements for defeating increasingly heavy German armor recognized that this anti-aircraft gun, if adapted for ground combat and provided with appropriate armor-piercing ammunition, could penetrate armor thicknesses that existing American weapons could not reliably defeat. The challenge lay not in the fundamental ballistics, which clearly demonstrated adequate performance, but in engineering a mobile fighting vehicle capable of carrying this substantial weapon, providing adequate ammunition storage, protecting the crew sufficiently for ground combat operations, and maintaining reliability under field conditions that routinely destroyed less robust equipment. Development work on what would become the M36 tank destroyer began in 1943, as American forces in Italy encountered German Panthers and Tigers with increasing frequency. The project required solving numerous engineering challenges within tight time constraints and resource limitations imposed by wartime. Production priorities. The 90mm gun weighed significantly more than the 3-inch weapon mounted in the M10, requiring structural reinforcement of the turret and chassis to handle firing stresses and recoil forces. The ammunition was substantially larger and heavier than 3-inch rounds, reducing the practical ammunition load that could be carried and complicating loading procedures within the confined turret space. Engineers adapted the existing M10 chassis, reinforcing critical structural components and redesigning the turret to accommodate the larger gun and its associated recoil mechanism. The turret, like the M10s, remained open-topped to reduce weight and simplify production, though this design choice left crews vulnerable to artillery airbursts, small arms fire from elevated positions, and hand grenades. The vehicle retained the M10's relatively thin armor, with maximum thickness of approximately 2 inches on the frontal hull, reflecting tank destroyer doctrine's continued emphasis on mobility and firepower over protection. Combat weight reached approximately 28 tons, still considerably lighter than the 56-ton Tiger, but substantially heavier than the M18 Hellcat's 18 tons. The critical component that transformed the M36 from merely adequate to genuinely formidable was the armor-piercing ammunition developed specifically for anti-tank employment. The M82 armor-piercing ballistic-capped projectile, weighing 24 pounds and fired at muzzle velocity of 2,650 feet per second, could penetrate approximately 7 inches of face-hardened armor plate at 1,000 yards under optimal impact conditions. This penetration capability exceeded the frontal armor thickness of the Tiger I by substantial margins, theoretically allowing M36 crews to engage and destroy Tigers at ranges approaching 2,000 yards, well beyond the distance at which Tiger crews expected effective American fire. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Production of the M36 began in earnest during mid-1944, with initial vehicles reaching European theatre units in September and October, as American forces pushed toward the German border following the breakout from Normandy. The vehicles arrived in relatively small numbers initially, supplementing rather than replacing existing M10 tank destroyers and M18 Hellcats that remained in service throughout the war. By December of 1944, when German forces launched their massive counteroffensive through the Ardennes forest, approximately 200 M36 tank destroyers had reached American units in Europe, distributed among various tank destroyer battalions, supporting infantry and armored divisions along the front. Crew training for the M36 emphasized the weapon's unprecedented long-range capability and the tactical opportunities this created for engaging German heavy armor from positions of relative safety. Gunners learned to estimate range accurately at distances exceeding 1,500 yards, where the flat trajectory of the 90mm round and its high muzzle velocity made precision fire feasible under good visibility conditions. Commanders received instruction on selecting firing positions that maximized the M36's range advantage, while minimizing exposure to German return fire, positioning vehicles in hull-down positions where only the turret remained visible to enemy observation. The German offensive through the Ardennes, launched on December 16, 1944, brought American M36 crews into direct combat against German heavy armor under conditions that would test both the vehicle's technical capabilities and the tactical doctrine surrounding its employment. The offensive deployed substantial German armored forces, including numerous Tiger I tanks, Tiger II King Tigers, and Panther medium tanks, representing the heaviest concentration of German armor on the Western Front since the Normandy campaign. German planners expected their heavy armor to achieve decisive breakthroughs against American defensive positions, exploiting perceived American vulnerability to massed armored assault and capitalizing on the numerical superiority of German heavy tanks in direct engagement. Near the village of Krinkelt on December 18th, elements of the 644th Tank Destroyer Battalion, equipped with M36 tank destroyers, occupied defensive positions, covering approaches that German armor would need to transit to maintain offensive momentum toward the Meuse River. The battalion had received its M36 vehicles only weeks earlier, allowing limited time for crew familiarization and tactical integration with supported infantry units. Many crew members had previously operated M10 tank destroyers, providing experience with similar turret layouts and fire control procedures, but the 90mm gun's superior range and penetration represented capabilities they had not previously possessed. As German armor advanced through the frozen landscape that morning, visibility conditions proved excellent, with clear skies and minimal ground fog, allowing observation at extended ranges. American observers identified Tigers advancing in company strength, approximately 14 vehicles, moving with supporting infantry toward positions held by elements of the 2nd Infantry Division. The Tigers advanced with confidence characteristic of crews operating vehicles they believed effectively invulnerable to American anti-tank weapons at any reasonable engagement distance, maintaining formation discipline but showing limited concern for tactical concealment or evasive maneuvering. M36 crews acquired targets at ranges approaching 2,000 yards, distances at which previous American tank destroyer weapons would have held fire due to negligible probability of effective penetration. The crews faced a tactical decision that reflected the uncertain confidence of personnel operating new equipment under combat conditions for the first time. Trust the technical specifications and engage at extreme range, or maneuver closer to guarantee penetration at distances where previous experience suggested effectiveness. The decision to engage immediately at long range reflected both tactical necessity, as closer approach would expose the lightly armoured M36 to devastating Tiger return fire, and calculated confidence in the weapon's advertised capabilities. The first 90mm armour-piercing rounds fired at Tigers that morning struck with effects that shocked both the American crews who fired them and the German tank commanders who had considered themselves effectively immune to American fire at such distances. Rounds penetrated Tiger frontal armour, the massive kinetic energy of the 24-pound projectile, travelling at 2,000+ feet per second, overwhelming the protective qualities of 100mm armour plate. Tigers that had dominated engagement areas for 2 years through superior protection and firepower suddenly faced weapons capable of destroying them at ranges where German crews could barely identify their attackers through optical sights. German tank commanders confronting this unprecedented threat responded initially with confusion and disbelief, their tactical training and combat experience providing no framework for understanding how American weapons could achieve penetration at distances exceeding 1,500 yards. Standard German doctrine called for closing range when engaged by tank destroyers, using superior armour protection and mobility to reach distances where the 88mm gun's superior rate of fire and accuracy would prove decisive. However, closing range against M36s merely brought Tigers into the optimal engagement envelope for the 90mm gun, where accuracy increased and penetration probability approached certainty. Radio communications between German tank commanders that day, later captured and analysed through signals intelligence intercepts, reflected growing alarm as crews realised that American weapons had fundamentally changed the tactical calculus of armoured engagement. One Tiger commander reported to his battalion headquarters that American fire was achieving penetrations at ranges previously considered safe, requesting guidance on how to engage effectively when standard assault tactics appeared suicidal. The response he received could offer little tactical comfort: maneuver for flank attacks where possible, use terrain masking to close range before exposure, and maintain aggressive offensive action despite casualties. The engagement near Krinkelt continued throughout December 18th, as German forces attempted to maintain offensive momentum despite unexpectedly effective American anti-tank defenses. The 644th Tank Destroyer Battalion's M36s, operating from carefully selected positions that maximized their range advantage, destroyed multiple Tigers and Panthers during the day's fighting, achieving kill ratios that contradicted German expectations of their armor's invulnerability. American after-action reports documented at least 7 confirmed Tiger kills, attributed to M36 fire during this engagement, with several additional probable kills where damaged Tigers withdrew from combat but may have been destroyed later by other weapons or abandoned by their crews. The psychological impact on German tank crews proved as significant as the material losses, though more difficult to quantify through official records. Crews who had operated Tigers with confidence born from 2 years of combat experience against inadequate Allied anti-tank weapons suddenly confronted an opponent capable of destroying their vehicles at distances where they could not effectively return fire. The fundamental tactical advantage that Tiger deployment had provided, the ability to engage enemy armour from positions of relative invulnerability, had evaporated with the introduction of a weapon system that German intelligence had failed to identify, characterize, or warn frontline units about. German tactical responses evolved rapidly, as commanders recognized that standard assault doctrine proved ineffective against M36-equipped American units. Panthers and Tigers began operating with increased emphasis on terrain masking, using ridges, forests, and buildings to approach American positions without exposure to long-range fire. Assault tactics shifted toward combined arms approaches that suppressed American positions with artillery before committing armor, rather than relying on the tank's protective qualities to survive during approach. These adaptations reflected professional tactical flexibility and combat experience, but they also represented admission that German heavy armor had lost the decisive qualitative advantage that justified its enormous production costs and resource consumption. The Battle of the Bulge continued through January of 1945, with M36 tank destroyers playing increasingly prominent roles in defensive operations that eventually contained and reversed the German offensive. As more M36 vehicles reached frontline units and crews gained confidence in the weapon's capabilities, engagement ranges increased and kill ratios improved. Tank destroyer battalions developed refined tactics for employing the M36, including coordinated firing positions that created overlapping fields of fire, a rapid displacement after firing to avoid counter-battery fire, and careful position selection that maximized the weapon's range advantage while minimizing exposure. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Statistical analysis of tank destroyer effectiveness during the Ardennes offensive demonstrates the M36's decisive impact on American defensive capabilities. Units equipped with M36 tank destroyers achieved substantially higher kill ratios against German armor compared to units relying on earlier M10 or M18 vehicles, despite operating under identical tactical conditions against similar enemy forces. The 90mm gun's penetration capability at extended range allowed American crews to engage German heavy armor on terms that negated the protection those vehicles were designed to provide, fundamentally altering the tactical balance of armored combat. German after-action reports and tactical assessments from the Ardennes campaign reflect growing recognition among German commanders that American anti-tank capabilities had evolved beyond their intelligence estimates. Reports noted with concern the appearance of new American tank destroyers, mounting weapons capable of penetrating heavy armor at previously impossible ranges, requesting technical intelligence on these weapons and tactical guidance for countering them effectively. The responses provided little comfort. American industry had adapted existing weapons for new roles, producing a vehicle that combined adequate mobility with firepower, superior to anything German forces could field in equivalent numbers. The broader implications extended beyond immediate tactical concerns to strategic questions about Germany's ability to maintain qualitative superiority in armored warfare, when American industrial capacity could produce hundreds of vehicles mounting weapons equivalent to Germany's best anti-tank guns. The M36 represented not just a single weapons system, but evidence of American willingness and ability to adapt rapidly to combat requirements, matching or exceeding German technical capabilities through pragmatic engineering and overwhelming production capacity. For German planners already confronting fuel shortages, production bottlenecks, and trained crew deficits, the M36's appearance signaled that even Germany's remaining qualitative advantages in armored warfare were eroding faster than they could be sustained through increasingly desperate defensive operations. American production of the M36 tank destroyer accelerated dramatically during the final months of 1944 and into 1945, as the weapon's combat effectiveness became undeniable through accumulating battlefield reports. Manufacturing facilities that had been producing M10 tank destroyers received orders to transition to M36 production, while additional contracts went to factories previously engaged in other armored vehicle programs. By war's end, in May of 1945, American industry had produced approximately 2,300 M36 tank destroyers, a remarkable achievement considering the vehicle had entered combat only 8 months earlier. This production surge reflected not merely industrial capacity but strategic recognition that the M36 addressed a critical capability gap in American armored forces. The vehicle provided frontline units with weapons capable of engaging German heavy armor on equal or superior terms, eliminating the tactical helplessness American tank and tank destroyer crews had experienced when confronting Tigers and Panthers with inadequate weapons. Tank destroyer battalions throughout the European theatre received priority for M36 allocation, with older M10 and M18 vehicles being progressively replaced as new M36s arrived from American factories and made the ocean crossing to European ports. The tactical impact extended beyond simple kill ratios to fundamental changes in how American armored units operated when facing German heavy armor. Commanders planning operations could now rely on having weapons capable of defeating any German armored vehicle at tactically relevant ranges, eliminating the need for elaborate flanking maneuvers or desperate close-range assaults that had characterized earlier engagements against Tigers. Infantry divisions supported by M36-equipped tank destroyer battalions faced German counterattacks with greater confidence, knowing their anti-tank defenses could engage enemy armor effectively before it reached American positions. German responses to the M36's proliferation revealed the limited options available to forces already stretched beyond sustainable limits across multiple fronts. Tank tactics evolved to emphasize even greater reliance on terrain masking and combined arms coordination, attempting to suppress American positions with artillery and infantry before exposing armor to anti-tank fire. However, these defensive adaptations contradicted the offensive doctrine that German armored forces had been designed to execute, effectively conceding tactical initiative to American forces, who could now engage German armor from positions of relative advantage. Intelligence assessments circulated through German armored units during early 1945 documented the M36's characteristics with reasonable accuracy, describing the 90mm gun's penetration capability and warning crews that frontal armor protection could no longer be relied upon at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards. These assessments recommended avoiding engagement with identified M36 positions when possible, seeking covered approaches that prevented long-range fire, and concentrating fires from multiple vehicles to suppress American positions before they could achieve accurate ranging. The recommendations were tactically sound but operationally impractical for forces conducting defensive operations with limited fuel, declining crew quality, and increasingly desperate strategic circumstances. The M36's combat record through the final months of the European War demonstrated consistent effectiveness against all varieties of German armor. Tank destroyer battalions equipped with M36s engaged and destroyed Tigers, Panthers, and the massive Tiger II, King Tiger, achieving penetrations that would have been impossible with earlier American weapons. After-action reports documented engagements at ranges approaching and occasionally exceeding 2,000 yards, confirming the weapon's advertised long-range capability under actual combat conditions. Crews developed confidence in their weapons' performance, approaching engagements with German heavy armor with professional calculation rather than the apprehension that had characterized earlier encounters with inadequate weapons. The vehicle's open-topped turret, which engineers had retained to reduce weight and simplify production, proved increasingly problematic as German forces adapted to the M36 threat. Artillery observers learned to identify M36 positions and call for airbursts that showered crews with shrapnel, inflicting casualties that fully enclosed turrets would have prevented. Crew losses to artillery fire, small arms, and hand grenades thrown from elevated positions led to field modifications, including improvised overhead armor and canvas covers, though these additions degraded the rapid target acquisition that open turrets facilitated. German armored forces confronting M36-equipped American units during the final months of the war operated under circumstances that transcended any single weapon system's impact, however significant. By early 1945, the Panzer faced catastrophic fuel shortages that immobilized entire formations, regardless of their equipment's theoretical capabilities. Tiger and Panther tanks consumed fuel at rates that German logistics could no longer sustain, forcing crews to abandon mechanically sound vehicles when fuel supplies failed to arrive. Training programs had collapsed under relentless Allied air attacks, acute fuel rationing, and the loss of experienced instructors to frontline attrition, producing replacement crews with inadequate preparation for operating complex vehicles under combat conditions. The tactical superiority that German heavy armor had once provided eroded not merely through American weapons development, but through the cumulative degradation of every system supporting armored operations. Maintenance facilities lacked spare parts as Allied bombing disrupted production and transportation networks. Replacement crews arrived at frontline units with minimal training, often lacking basic proficiency in operating their assigned vehicles. Air superiority, which German forces had enjoyed during the war's early years, had shifted completely to Allied control, subjecting German armor to constant aerial attack during daylight movement and forcing operations into night hours when coordination became nearly impossible. Within this context of systematic collapse, the M36's appearance represented one additional challenge among many that German forces could neither adequately counter nor effectively ignore. Tank commanders who had once approached engagements with American armor confident in their vehicles' protective qualities now operated with the knowledge that even frontal armor could be penetrated at ranges where evasive maneuvering proved difficult. This psychological burden added to the already overwhelming stress of operating under constant air attack, with inadequate fuel, insufficient ammunition, and increasingly desperate strategic circumstances. German engineering responses to the M36 and similar Allied weapons developments came too late and in insufficient quantities to affect operational outcomes. Proposals for improved armor protection, more powerful guns, and better mobility remained largely theoretical, as industrial capacity struggled simply to maintain existing production levels under relentless Allied bombing. The few advanced designs that reached production, including the Jagd Panther tank destroyer mounting the formidable 88mm PaK-43 gun, entered service in numbers too small to influence strategic outcomes, often immobilized by fuel shortages or destroyed by air attack before reaching combat. Post-war interrogations of German tank commanders and technical personnel revealed consistent themes regarding their assessment of American armored capabilities during the war's final phase. Officers acknowledged that American weapons development had progressed beyond German intelligence estimates, producing vehicles like the M36 that matched or exceeded German equivalents in critical performance categories. More significantly, they recognized that American industrial capacity allowed production of these advanced weapons in quantities that German industry could not approach, even under optimal conditions that no longer existed by 1945. The psychological impact of confronting American weapons that contradicted years of propaganda about technical superiority proved difficult to quantify but impossible to dismiss in German accounts. Crews who had been assured of their equipment's superiority discovered through painful combat experience that American engineering could produce weapons matching German performance, while American industry could manufacture them in overwhelming numbers. This recognition contributed to the broader collapse of morale that characterized German forces during the war's final months, as the gap between official pronouncements and battlefield reality became impossible to ignore or rationalize. German tactical doctrine evolved continuously throughout the war's final year, attempting to counter Allied advantages through innovation and adaptation within increasingly constrained circumstances. However, no tactical innovation could overcome the fundamental imbalances in industrial capacity, resource availability, and strategic position that characterized Germany's situation by 1945. The M36 represented not an insurmountable technical challenge, but another manifestation of Allied material superiority that German forces could acknowledge, analyze, and attempt to counter without possessing the resources necessary for effective response. The legacy of German encounters with American tank destroyers like the M36 extended into post-war military analysis and doctrine development. Officers studying armored warfare examined how American forces had adapted existing weapons for new roles, emphasizing pragmatic effectiveness over doctrinal purity. The willingness to mount an anti-aircraft gun on a tank destroyer chassis, accepting compromises in protection and crew comfort to achieve decisive firepower advantage, reflected an engineering philosophy that prioritized combat results over theoretical elegance or traditional weapon categorization. The M36 tank destroyer's significance within the broader context of World War II armoured warfare extends beyond its impressive technical specifications or combat record to illuminate fundamental differences in how American and German forces approached weapons development, industrial production, and tactical adaptation. The vehicle represented a distinctly American solution to a combat problem, emphasizing rapid development, pragmatic design compromises, and mass production over the perfectionism and technical sophistication that characterized German weapons engineering. German armored doctrine throughout the war pursued qualitative superiority through increasingly complex, expensive, and difficult-to-manufacture designs. The Tiger I, Panther, and Tiger II represented engineering achievements that impressed even their opponents, combining powerful armament, thick armor protection, and sophisticated fire control in vehicles that dominated engagement areas when properly employed by skilled crews. However, this approach demanded resources, manufacturing time, and maintenance support that Germany could not sustain against opponents possessing superior industrial capacity and access to strategic materials. American doctrine accepted that individual vehicles might prove inferior to German counterparts in direct comparison, but emphasized producing adequate weapons in overwhelming quantities, supported by robust logistics, reliable maintenance, and thorough crew training. The M36 exemplified this philosophy, combining an existing gun with a proven chassis to create a weapon that achieved the specific performance required, adequate protection for its intended role, and design characteristics that facilitated mass production. The vehicle was not perfect by engineering standards. Its open turret left crews vulnerable, its armor protection remained minimal, and its combat weight pushed the chassis near its structural limits. However, it accomplished its mission effectively and could be produced in numbers that German industry could not match. The speed of American weapons development, from recognizing the requirement for improved anti-tank capability through design, testing, production, and deployment to frontline units, demonstrated institutional flexibility that German forces struggled to replicate under wartime pressures. The M36 entered combat approximately 18 months after initial development work began, a timeline that reflected streamlined decision-making, industrial capacity to rapidly expand production, and willingness to field weapons that met requirements without pursuing theoretical perfection. German weapons development during the same period often consumed years in refinement, testing, and redesign, producing technically superior designs that arrived too late or in insufficient quantities to affect operational outcomes. The M36's combat employment revealed American tactical doctrine's emphasis on combined arms coordination and mutual support, rather than relying on individual weapons systems to achieve decisive results independently. Tank destroyer battalions operated in coordination with infantry, armor, artillery, and air support, creating defensive systems where the M36's long-range anti-tank capability complemented other weapons' strengths. This integrated approach contrasted with German tactical employment that often expected individual superior weapons like the Tiger to achieve decisive results through inherent technical advantages, an assumption that proved increasingly unrealistic as Allied material superiority accumulated. The vehicle's post-war service life demonstrated the fundamental soundness of its design and the enduring relevance of its 90mm gun. M36 tank destroyers remained in American service through the immediate post-war period and saw combat again during the Korean War, where they engaged Soviet-supplied T-34 tanks with the same devastating effectiveness they had demonstrated against German armor. The basic chassis and turret design influenced subsequent American armored vehicle development, while the 90mm gun served as armament for various vehicles well into the 1950s. For the German tank commander scanning the frozen Belgian landscape that December morning in 1944, the shell that penetrated his Tiger's frontal armor represented more than mechanical failure or tactical defeat. It symbolized the collision between German assumptions about American technical capability and the material reality of American industrial adaptation. His training, his intelligence briefings, and his combat experience had assured him that American weapons could not threaten his vehicle at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards. The M82 armor-piercing round that proved those assumptions catastrophically wrong was not some secret wonder weapon or captured German technology, but an American anti-aircraft gun adapted for a role its designers had never envisioned. Mounted on a chassis that prioritized production efficiency over elegance, and fired by crews who had learned their profession in the vast training facilities that American industrial capacity made possible. The story of how 90mm anti-aircraft guns became Tiger killers at 2,000 yards illustrates a fundamental truth about industrial warfare that German forces learned through bitter experience during World War II's final years. Technical sophistication and engineering excellence, however impressive, could not overcome an opponent possessing superior resources, greater industrial capacity, and the pragmatic willingness to adapt existing weapons for new roles when combat necessity demanded immediate solutions rather than perfect designs. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.